today's World Insight with Tian Wei, we focus on how history could inspire us at a time of drastic change. First, 40 years of China-U.S. ties. How is it going to be shaped today? Our exclusive features down-to-earth answers.
Which is a big guideline of the relations. Still works, but not enough.
And celebrating China's reform and opening up, Pulitzer Prize-winning photographer Liu Heung Shing captures China's transformation from the frame to the heart. Hello and welcome to World Insight with me, Tian Wei. The program is coming to you live on CGTN from Beijing. December the 16th marks the 40th anniversary of China and the U.S. signing of the joint communique on the establishment of diplomatic relations. It is one of the three crucial joint communiques that laid the foundation for bilateral relations. During the past 40 years, bilateral relations between the two countries have fostered economic and social development for people in both nations. But China and U.S. ties these days are now facing challenges on many fronts. Against that current backdrop, with the need for mutual respect at all levels has become ever more urgent. Take a look.
The story began in 1971 when former U.S. Secretary of State Henry Kissinger made his first visit to China, opening a new chapter in the China-U.S. relations. Kissinger met with Zhou Enlai, and the then Chinese premier expressed his hopes for improved bilateral ties. This trip paved the way for the groundbreaking 1972 meeting between the then U.S. President Richard Nixon and Chinese Chairman Mao Zedong, ending 23 years of diplomatic isolation and mutual hostility. At the conclusion of this trip, China and the U.S. signed the Shanghai Communique, the first communique between the two sides. In the document, both nations pledged to work toward the full normalization of diplomatic relations. The U.S. acknowledged that there was only one China and that Taiwan is part of China. Both sides agreed to respect each other's national sovereignty and territorial integrity. And the two nations agreed to take action against any country establishing hegemony in the Asia-Pacific. The second communique was an achievement of the then U.S. President Gerald Ford's visit to China in December 1975. Known as the Joint Communique on the Establishment of Diplomatic Relations, this document formally announces the commencement of normal relations between the two nations. In doing so, the U.S. reiterated its stance on recognizing only one China. In addition, Washington also declared it would end formal political relations with Taiwan. Both sides reaffirmed their wish to reduce the risk of international conflict. On January 1, 1979, China and the United States officially opened their diplomatic relations at the ambassadorial level. In the same year, at the invitation of the then U.S. President Jimmy Carter, then Chinese leader Deng Xiaoping's first visit to Washington raised bilateral ties to a new level. The two governments issued the third communique on August 17, 1982. This document reaffirmed the desire of both sides to further strengthen economic, cultural, educational, scientific, and technological ties. Both sides also reaffirmed the statements made about the Taiwan issue in the previous communique. Washington declared its intent to gradually decrease its sale of arms to Taiwan. The three joint communiques between the two nations have always been the foundation for bilateral ties.
On December the 18th, 1978, just 2 days after the joint communique of the establishment of China-U.S. diplomatic relations was published, China's leaders decided on a new course of reform and opening up at the third plenary session of the 11th CPC Central Committee. How did China's policy of opening up affect the relations with the United States and vice versa? Recently, I sat down with Yuan Peng, the president of China Institute of Contemporary International Relations. He says the connection between the two is more than certain.
Ups and downs is a rule of U.S. and China relations. I still remember that this year is the 40th anniversary of the second U.S.-China communique on the normalization of the relations. Almost the same dates with the initiation of Chinese opening up and reform, which means the two great events, U.S.-China normalization and reform and opening up, happened almost same time. They have their logic. Without the normalization of the relations, we won't have opening up and reform, because to whom we opening up? On the other hand, without the great decision of the opening up and reform, I don't think U.S.-China normalization will be ended during that time. So those two great events, have some interlinked at the very beginning. The past 40 years show that, on the one hand, Chinese opening up and reform is a very successful end. That is China from the underdeveloped country to number 2 economy in the world. But don't forget, we have another successful story. That is the U.S.-China relations. The problem is that after 40 years of the two great successes, now we're entering another 40 years.
That is exactly the question I want to ask you about. Will the two events, will the two issues still be closely linked with one another?
40 years ago, the interlink that is that the U.S.-China relations normalization is very useful for Chinese opening up and reform. We need American investment. America needs Chinese market. They embrace China into American-led international order. They thought they want to drag China in so that to change China. But the 40 years history showed that China is successful, but Chinese social system, political system remain, and we have more confidence than before. Then some Americans feel uneasy, feel disappointed, even feel frustration. Then they want to have some new strategy. But the 40 years of the history told us U.S.-China relations, Chinese development, Americans development, those things are highly linked with each other.
Global governance is one thing, but what about the other aspect of China-U.S. relations? For the bilateral issue, whether it is trade, whether it's geopolitics, or the roles that the two countries will play in the region, for example, Asia-Pacific, while the U.S. was saying Indo-Pacific, is a big question marks facing all of us today, one after another. Professor Yuan, your thought?
Yeah, Asian-Pacific is our surrounding areas, but also viewed by the states as its core national interest places. President Trump opposed everything that President Obama initiated, but one thing, he has more continuity than change. That is still put his strategic focus in this region, using another term, Indo-Pacific. So which means the first time in history, at least in past 50 or 60 years, and maybe next 30 years, American will put Asia-Pacific or Indo-Pacific as its strategic focus. This is a very big change. And from American perspective, China is an Asian-Pacific power, now much more powerful. President Xi said that Pacific is wide enough, can have both U.S. and China and other powers to play together, while America didn't respond that very positively, which means America didn't prepare strategically and psychologically to the new arrival of China. So how to find a new roadmap, how to find the new rule for U.S. and China live peacefully in Asia-Pacific is a common task for both U.S. and China. So this is not so far misperception. So if you will have a comprehensive understanding of today's China, you need to readjustment your mindset. So both U.S. and China, we need mutual adjustment, not strategically, but psychologically.
That's very interesting, the phrase you just used, Professor Yuan, mutual adjustment. To the U.S. side, you mentioned about several things that it should adjust to when it comes to the realities of China and the possible approach that the U.S. could adopt vis-a-vis China. But what about from the Chinese side, the adjustment?
From Chinese side, number one, I think we should have very clear understanding of Chinese new identity in the world.
Mm-hmm. And which is?
Which is now we are number 2 economy. We are, relatively speaking, we are much stronger country in the world than years before, than decades before. So any decision made by Chinese government, you should have built in your mind that we're easily to arouse the international reaction. How to be more capable in engaging the global governance, working with major countries, working with the partners in the world to jointly manage the difficulties that we all faced in the future.
There's different levels of issues strategically that the two countries need to think about. We used to have a description of the exact nature of these bilateral relations. We also have mutually agreed different principles about how things will be done when we have difficulties, and certainly the ways to resolve them technically. But now it seems that everything has to start from scratch.
Yeah, this is not good news for both countries, because in the past 40 years we have ups and downs. We have a positive story and negative stories. We have competition, but we also have cooperation. But today, the narrative of, in particular from American media, academic, even think tank reports, and even the top leaders' statements show that competition is the only part of the relations, which is not true. So this is worrisome for me to see. I think it's time for both sides to sitting down, to go beyond some technical issues like trade, like South China Sea, like DPRK nuclear issues, to think about some big picture of the relations, new framework, new roadmap. Otherwise, without the new framework, the relations will be easily dragged to some pieces to make the relations led by negative stories, negative reactions.
Right. I understand you, as the head of Kicker, have been working with your American counterparts, different think tanks, to discuss those issues. Now, if you could, together with others, provide some advice or suggestions to the top leaderships of these two countries, what's going to be next 40 years?
Number one, I think, for us, is how to review the past 40 years. The past 40 years, why U.S.-China relations, we didn't have hot war, cold war, and the trade relations booming, and people-to-people exchanges flourishing. We have lots of good experiences that can be drawn to guide the futures, like people-to-people relations, like the crisis management, like the head of states diplomacy, like the mechanism building up establishments, like make the economic and the trade relations is the cornerstone of the relations. Lots of experiences. So it's time for the think tankers to draw those lessons and good experiences together. This is the first thing that we should bear in mind. And secondly, we need some new guideline, new framework, because the relations now have a radical change. Apparently, and also both domestic politics and also the whole international structure, international relations, environment, international environment. So beyond the 3 joint communiques and several joint statements, which is a big guideline of the relations, still works, but not enough. We need some new thinking.
Like what?
Like, for example, President Xi several years ago initiated the so-called new model or new type of major power relations.
But that did not get much response from the U.S. side.
I think it's a tragedy. So far, I still think it's a very wise initiative because the 3 major contents of this still works. No conflict, no confrontation, mutual respect, win-win cooperation. So if you don't have positive response to Chinese initiative, then okay, we welcome American to have your own positive initiative, rather than just blame China, rather than just say some bad words about China.
Which doesn't help.
Which doesn't help. So if you do want to have a Cold War against China, that's one thing. If you do want to move the relations forward, then we can jointly initiate some positive initiative. And thirdly, I think we need to put the crisis management in up to a strategic level, because we cannot afford any kind of crisis in South China Sea, Taiwan Straits, even in financial and trade aspects. We need crisis management. And fourthly, maybe we should focus on our energy and resources on finding some cooperative areas.
Like what? Once again.
Like the dinner meeting between the 2 leaders talking about the cooperation on the drugs, fentanyl, like DPRK nuclear issue, like trade, like WTO, new round of the WTO reform, like global governance cooperation, climate change. If we focus more time on cooperative side, then we'll be offset to those negative picture. And finally, I think people-to-people relations, local-to-local relations, mule-to-mule relations matters, because the relations is so complicated, cannot be just led by the head of state, cannot be just led by the foreign affairs or State Department. It's an all-round work. So if different aspects working closely in the daily basis, so I don't think U.S.-China relations bound to go to the so-called Thucydides trap.
Professor Yuan, it's such a pleasure talking to you, particularly now when the world is thinking where the 2 largest economies, their bilateral relations is going. Thank you so much, sir, for being with us.
Thank you.
That is our exclusive with Yuan Peng, talking about what kind of groundwork needs to be laid here in order for the bilateral relations between China and the United States to move forward today. Stay with us here on World Insight. Still to come on the program. Celebrating China's reform and opening up, Pulitzer Prize-winning photographer Liu Heung Shing captures China's transformation from the frame to the heart. Catch that interview right after this break. Welcome back. You're still watching World Insight with me, Tian Wei. This week, we conclude our special series, Witness to History, featuring people who have special ties to China's past 40 years of reform and opening up. Today, let's meet Pulitzer Prize-winning photographer Liu Heung Shing. History is remembered not as thick tome, but a series of flashpoints. Photographers, therefore, are significant messengers, particularly when they capture a moment in time and help us form a collective memory of the history. China's reform and opening up over the past 4 decades has brought changes at a dizzying speed. Blink and you will miss it. But thanks to the works of photographers like Liu Heung Shing and his peers, the Chinese can still gauge where everything started, with all the struggles, confusion, excitement, and success frozen in time. When he first arrived in China, the Hong Kong-born Chinese-American Liu was the only Western photographer based in China. Instead of focusing on the grand schemes like his Chinese counterparts did then, he was fascinated and later well known for capturing the real lives of the Chinese and making fascinating analogies of them through visual language. I spent a Saturday morning with him in Beijing recently and was wonderfully overwhelmed by his stories through photos. You are very good at photographing young people, particularly at the very beginning of China's reform and opening up. Not just them, but also 3 gentlemen in sunglasses.
Yes.
That's quite an iconic photo.
Yes, it was taken in Yunnan province, which borders with Thailand. And one day I went down there to photograph the Water Festival, which is an annual festival of the Dai people that follows the solar calendar. And in the distance, I saw these 3 men, wandering and towards me. And I said, gee, there is this perception of Chinese look alike. And there they are, look exactly alike. So they walked towards me, and I walked towards them. And the result was that photograph.
I remember there was a photo about Beijing during the winter time. The Chinese cabbage, a whole truck of it being thrown back and forth. And certainly that is the food, the only vegetable, together with potato, that the Chinese could rely on throughout the winter, almost 4 or 5 months. And that was such a vivid photo. You could almost hear the sound of the Chinese cabbage being flied around. Yes. How did you catch that moment?
That photograph was taken, this truck just rolled down the field, and then on both sides, the people harvesting the cabbage and load it onto the truck. And I tried it myself.
Oh,
I couldn't do it. It looks
so
easy.
Easy, yeah.
But each of these cabbage weighs around 20 kilos.
Absolutely.
It's one thing to move it side by side, but to throw it up and land it properly takes a lot of skills. So, and also I love the idea that the cabbage, 4 or 5 of them in the air. Mm-hmm. It was like a symphony.
It's like a symphony and an air show.
It's a musical notes for Beijing residents at that time, and it was generally true throughout the northern China. That cabbage was the only vegetable in the regular diet that would last for 6 months. Mm. So I start noticing people were buying cabbage by literally 1,000 kilo. Mm-hmm. So I will visit Chinese people's home, in the stairway, in the corridor, everywhere, in the corners of the living room, just piles with this cabbage.
Now you see the so-called street photography is so vibrant here in China. Mm-hmm. But people also ask about the styles. There used to be styles more influenced by the former Soviet Union, and now it seems the style have been switching, very different from their time, probably getting closer to your style, or styles of so-called Western photographers.
There's a bit of a cultural differences in this regard. Chinese people in general, they don't wear the emotion on the face, so to speak. I photograph how Chinese people laugh. There was one couple, they sit together, they chit-chat, and their legs and feet were touching each other. I think a Western photographer would do nothing for them, would pass right by that image. But many Chinese
look at their photograph, they respond to it.
Right.
They say, well, this is more kind of, the Chinese word is more 含蓄, it's more
indirect.
Indirect, it's more, you know, it's kind of not in your face. Photography does certain things very, very well, and that is to project emotion and display your empathy to people you photograph, to people you observe. And I think to do that, the photographer has to be more direct in some way. And because you can always look at a photograph, look at the subject's eyes. The eyes convey a lot of information, right? You take a portrait, how does the person sitting in the portrait look at you, at your camera, tells you a lot of information. So these are the things that when perhaps outside of China people look at the photographs, books and so on, they discern there is not an immediate connection between people photographed and the photographer and those being photographed, because that convey to the people look at the photographs. So these are the things perhaps make this body of work, especially in that period of the early years of reform, a little bit different.
I also noticed that you follow people. You follow people into their lives, not just about one photo, but rather try to get to know what is the context of that one photo that you're taking. For example, a young lady who is wearing maybe a Dior bra or something, very fashionable, and the onlookers are all interestingly surprised, to put the list. And you followed her to her home. She also had a photo standing in the little room she had. That is a very interesting contrast about realities
yes.
and aspirations.
Yes, and she's a very tall model. She must be about 6'2", and that photograph of her, stooping in the room, served as both the bedroom and the living room. Give us a real sense of what is daily life look like. There is this one photograph. She's in the splendor of Dior, a beautiful white bra. Is that daily lives matters. For example, every time I describe the photographs to the friends in the West, they all laugh. There was this photograph, the earliest days of Chinese women having a plastic, surgery done, and she only had one eye done first, and I didn't understand
and you can't
that.
cover.
So I asked them, how come this eye is double eyelid and this eye is your original eyes? She said, well, if I have the both done, I cannot go home on a bicycle because she will be both covered, so she can't go home. And that, it says so much about China and that period of the daily life. And fast forward or backward, if you like, in 40 years, you might as well look at China of 200 years. The difference is just stark difference.
China's reform and opening up was monumental in its own sense. But in retrospect, it is also part of the global changes in progress during the 1970s and 1980s. Liu Heung Shing did not miss any of them. His photos depicting the very last days of former Soviet Union won him the Pulitzer Prize for that year. As an experienced journalist, he tried to be cool-minded when history was revealing itself in front of him. But as an individual, he was just like every one of us, overwhelmed by how fast the world transformed. In my conversation with him, we zoomed in to those stories and afterthoughts. You catch that moment. Every one of your peers was so jealous of you about that moment. Tell us, what exactly is that moment?
One day in the afternoon, I remember in 1991, when I first arrived in Moscow, I received a call on my portable phone. In those days, our portable phone is this big because it has to be patched to AT&T in New York and come back. So I picked up the phone, and it was a call from Tom Johnson, chairman of CNN. Said, HS, are you busy this evening? I said, well, doesn't call me every day. And I said, sure, I'm available. He said, okay, meet me at 7 p.m. at Spassky Gate at the Kremlin. So I duly show up. I didn't realize that CNN and Tom Johnson had negotiated a deal with the Kremlin, with Mr. Gorbachev, that CNN would be the first one to interview him. I was already very surprised that I was the only photographer.
Wow. You got an exclusive.
And so the time came, I said, well, my best spot would be to sit in front of the tripod and looking at Gorbachev like I look at you now. And so there was a KGB guard standing next to the cameraman. And he was benign. He was good-hearted. He said, your camera shutter would interfere with live broadcast, and please do not take any photographs. I said, fair enough. It's a very legitimate request. So as I sat in front of the tripod, I saw him reading 1 page, 2 page, and I said, oh, there's only 1 page left. And I thought to myself, when he throw down this page, that will be the end of history, so to speak. I said, how can I not do anything then? But I knew very well if I do anything earlier, it will be just a picture of the speech, or look like a press conference picture. It wouldn't go anywhere. So I said, okay, I wanted to take a big risk. I want to slow down my shutter speed to 1/30 of a second, because I want him to fold down the paper, and I want to see the paper's movement, because that was the moment the Soviet Union ceased to exist. That would be the end of the Soviet Union. So as he's about to throw down the last page of his speech, I pick up my camera, I make the 1 frame. Right. So just at that moment, the KGB guard threw me a punch through the tripod. And Tom Johnson was standing on the right side of Gorbachev, was communicating with me with his eyes, said, are you okay? And I said, I'm fine. So and then he gave his Mont Blanc pen to Gorbachev, and he signed his resignation. And that was the moment, the history of Soviet Union. And you caught every second of it. When I rushed out, I saw the red carpet of the Kremlin. I run, and I saw all the Western journalists, hundreds of them. They're waiting. And I rushed down to the Spassky Gate in the Red Square, and the Russian flag was going up, and the Soviet Union flag was coming down. So the next day, I guess it fronted many newspapers, front page around the world. Fascinating story. That's how history happened, and photographers caught the moment. Having said that, though, you got millions of cameras around you, literally, on the street. Everybody has a mobile phone, and everybody could be the we media, as they say. What do you make of this stage, the enormous amounts of photography, and yet the quality of the photography? Well, according to the survey, in 2017, the world took 1.2 trillion photographs. Photograph has become part of everybody's life. Every day, they send pictures to each other. So in this era, when you're looking at the news photographs or documentaries, essays, and so on the terminal, on the gallery, it's a very different way of looking at the images when you open the newspaper or open the magazine. There are still some photographs like a Turkish child, refugee child on the beach in Turkey and so on. That still startled the world. But the way photographs were used to convey the story has changed. And now, out of that 1.2 trillion images, I think now a tiny fraction of it may end up in a book, may end up in a museum wall, so that the ways people appreciate photograph has changed. The way photographs are defined have also been changed.
Making records of history through his camera lens, Liu Heung Shing has won worldwide recognition, but as an individual, always with a curious mind, always ready to take on new challenges, how does he get his fix? A walk with him in one of his favorite Beijing haunts, the ancient Beihai Park, during the weekend gives away the answers. You were interacting with the grandmas and the grandpas who are dancing in the park.
Yes.
Do they tell you much about the real China stories?
I think they do, very much in fact, because China that I know has moved since the late 1970s, when the reform began, from very much a collective society to now, as the ladies in the park, you see, they really enjoy a much more individualistic style.
Yeah.
That they dance, they laugh, they chit-chat with their friends.
With the rhythmic music.
And the people we met, they're from Yunnan province. So, domestic travel, international travel, China has moved to a point that is unrecognizable.
This is only a very quiet and a very special corner of Beijing. And of course, this city has changed so much. Bicycles, cars, but that's on the surface. The gene in people's way of thinking, have things changed much? Where is it going?
I remember in 1978 when I first became resident of Beijing, I felt if I travel past the second ring road, I'm heading towards Hebei province. But today, as you know, China is up to 6 ring roads. I think it's very difficult to envision the speed of the development in China without understanding how the first 30 years versus the second 30 years, the first 3 decades and the second 3 decades. In fact, I think people felt they have lost time and they want to make up. And some of the things is very personal. For a lot of parents, they felt they have lost the opportunity to education, and now they're going very big time to make sure their kids are well educated. So
to catch up.
To catch up. And this is really the speed that the world are still adjusting to.
We are in this royal garden in a way, Beihai Park. The beautiful pagodas in the distance. This reminds us a lot about traditional Chinese culture in a way. On the one hand, China embraces the world. On the other hand, there's so much in China's history, just as many other civilizations, that the people now could get inspirations from. But that is also a beautiful balance. And that is also a selective process about exactly what do you get inspiration from, about what. So, HS, your thought about that, I'm sure you have been thinking about it 20 years walking around this park.
Well, Beihai Park, as you know, is used to be an imperial park of the Chinese emperors. I think in the world we talk about artificial intelligence and all this scientific breakthrough. It's very, very important for us to look back at the history and feel reassured about the merit of this civilization. At the same time, Chinese people also keep talking about how you engage with the world, how you join the world. So while you look back as a source of comfort, you must also look forward And that's oftentimes a challenge. I think it's a challenge. I have to emphasize it is universally true.
A lot of food for thought, what you have just said. But it's a beautiful morning and the birds are singing. I don't want to delay you too much from your enjoy yourself here in Beijing. So let's go and take a look.
Please do. Let me grab my camera.
Okay, of course. Our story of Liu Heung Shing, the Pulitzer Prize winning photographer, helping us to remember the dramatic changes in China over the past 40 years during the reform and opening up. And that is all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more, try to find us World Insight CGTN into your search engine or check out our YouTube channel. Also follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Sina Weibo. From me, Tian Wei, and everyone on the World Insight team, thanks for watching and tune in again next time for insights across China and around the world. Good night.